Hey there, how's it going everybody? In this video, we'll be learning how to work with JSON data in Python. Now, if you've never used JSON, basically it's a very common data format for storing some information. And you're bound to run into this at some point if you haven't already. So you'll see JSON used a lot when fetching data from online APIs, but it's also used for configuration files and different kinds of data that can be saved on your local machine. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, but don't get caught up on the JavaScript part of the name. It was inspired by JavaScript, but is now independent of any one language. So pretty much every language these days has libraries for parsing and generating JSON data. So let's go ahead and get started and see what this looks like in Python. So first of all, I've imported the JSON library here at the top of the file, and this is part of the standard library, so there's no need to install anything. And I have a multi-line string here that is valid JSON. And you can see that this almost looks like a Python dictionary. So this JSON here has a key called people, and the value of people is an array of more objects. So in this case, it's just two more objects. And each object has a key of name, a key of phone, emails, and has license, which is just a boolean of true or false. So right now, this is just a Python string that happens to be valid JSON. So let's see how to load this into a Python object so that we can work with the data more easily. So to load this into Python from a string, we can use the JSON.loads method. And so to do this, we can say data equals JSON.loads, and we want to pass in that string into that loads function. So I'll save that, and now let's print this out. So I will just print out data and run that. Okay, so we can see that it prints that out, but it's not very clean. It's kind of bunched together, but it looks like a Python dictionary. So if I check the type of this data variable and just print out the type of data, save that and run it, then we can see that that is a dictionary. So when we load JSON into a Python object, it uses the following conversion table. Let me pull this up here to convert this into a Python object. So when it parses out that string, if it finds a JSON object, it converts that to a Python dictionary. It converts JSON arrays into a Python list, a string into a Python string, integers into integers, and these real numbers and the floats. The true values you can see get converted to a capital case true and a capital case false, and null values get converted to a Python none value. So that is how these conversions happen. So now let me open back up our Python. So if I print out this data variable again, then run this, then we can see that so we have a Boolean value here, and you can see that this is now uppercase, and we also had a null value up here for the second object's emails as null, and we can see that that got converted to none. So those conversions did take place. So since our top level key here is a array of values, that should now be equal to a list. So since this is a dictionary, we should be able to access this key of people, and that should be a list. So let's print out the type, and let's access that people key of that dictionary. So if I save that and print that out, then you can see that that is a list. So that got converted. So now that we've converted that JSON to Python objects, it's going to be a lot easier to work with these. So now we can loop through all these people and access each one individually. So since that is a list, I could say for person in data and then access that people key there. And then for each one of those, we could just print out the person. So if I save that and run it, then you can see that it ran each of these people individually. And since each of these people in our original JSON are objects themselves, then those should have got converted to dictionaries as well. So now we can access those values within our loop. So if we wanted to access the name of each person, then we can just come here within our loop and say person, and then access that name variable. So if I save that and run it, then you can see that now we're accessing the names of each person in that JSON file. Okay, great. So now that we've seen how to load a JSON string into a Python object, now let's do the reverse of that and dump a Python object into a JSON string. And to do this, we'll use the JSON.dumps method. So in our example, let's say that we wanted to remove the phone numbers from each person and then convert this back to a JSON string. So to remove the phone number key and value from each person, within our loop, we can just delete that value. So within our loop here, we can just say del for delete, person and then access that phone key, and that will delete the key and the value from that dictionary. So now that we've removed those phone numbers from those objects, let's dump all of that back into a string using that dump s method. So I will say new string is equal to, and it's JSON Dump s, and we want to dump in this data dictionary that we just modified. So now let's print this out. So I'll print out that new string, save that and run it. Let me make this a little larger here. So we can see that we have a new JSON string that no longer contains the phone numbers for each person. Now, since this is a string, it would be nice if we could just format this in a way where it's easier to read. So to do this, we can pass in an indent argument to our function, to our dump s function, to indent this correctly. So we could say when we dump this, we could pass in indent is equal to, and then the number of indentions per item in the string. So if we save that and run it, then we can see that for each level, it indents it twice. So this nested level is indented 4 times, and then this one 6 times, and so on. So when you're dumping these as strings, if you want to format it in a way that's very easy to read, then using that indent method really helps out and makes it a lot easier to see exactly what's going on. Now, another thing that you can do to clean up your JSON when dumping it to a string is to sort the keys. So if we pass in an argument of sort keys is equal to true, so at the end here, it's sort underscore keys, I'll set that equal to true. If we save that and run it, then we can see that now all these keys are sorted alphabetically, where email comes first and then has license and then name. Now, that may or may not be what you want, but you have the option there if you want it. Okay, so now that we've seen how to convert strings to Python objects and vice versa, now let's see how to load JSON files into Python objects and then write those objects back to JSON files. So I'm going to go ahead and delete everything here that we have so far except for our imports and save that and clear that out. Now I have a JSON file in the same directory as my Python script here, and this is called states.json, and this is a JSON file with a list of all the US states, their abbreviations, and their area codes. So if I wanted to load this file into a Python object, then we can use the JSON load method. So just remember, the load method loads a file into a Python object, and the load s method we saw before loads a string. So to load in this file, we first have to open it. So we can open this file with a with statement. So we can say with open, and that file is in the same directory, so that we don't have to pass in a path. It's just called states.json, and we're just going to read that. So we'll leave that as the default, and we'll just say as f. And now with this file open, we can load this into a Python object by saying data is equal to json.load and load in that file. Now, if you've never worked with file objects before and you don't really know what's going on here with this with open statement and what we're doing there, then I do have a separate video on working with file objects if you're interested, and I'll leave a link to that in the description section below. Okay, so now that we've loaded this JSON file into a Python object, we should be able to loop through our data just like we did before. Now, if I look back at the JSON file, we can see that there is a states key here, and then that is a list of objects, and all of these objects have a name, abbreviation, and area code. So if I go back to my list to loop through those, remember that was a states key, so we could say for state in data, then access that states key. And then for each of those, let's just print out the entire object. And that object we just called state for the state variable. So if I save that and run it, then it should print out that object for each state. And now that this is a Python object, it's very easy to access this information in any way that you want. So for example, if you wanted to print out just the name and the abbreviation, then you could say state name, then we'll put in a comma, and also print out the state abbreviation. So copy that, paste that in there, save it and run it. And you can see that now we have the state and the abbreviation accessed from that JSON file. Okay, so now that we've loaded this JSON from a file, now let's write this Python object out to a JSON file. Like we did in the smaller example, let's just remove one of the keys from the data and then write that to a new file. So in this example, let's go ahead and just remove the area codes. So like we saw a bit ago, to remove that from a dictionary, we can just say del and then what we want to delete. So we'll delete the, let's see, that is I believe, area underscore codes. Yeah, I'll just copy and paste it so I don't spell anything wrong. So save that. So now we've removed the area codes from that data. And now to write this file as JSON, we will use the JSON.dump method. So just like with the load and the load_s method, the dump method converts the data to a JSON file, and the dump_s method converts the data to a JSON string, just like we saw before. So first, we have to open the file that we want to write to. So just like before when we read in the data, we'll say with open, and we can call this whatever we want. So I'll just call this new underscore states.json, and we want to write this file. So we got to pass in a W as an argument there, and we'll just say as F. And now we can dump that data to the file just by saying JSON.dump. And first we want to pass in the data that we want to dump. So that is this data variable here. And then what we want to dump this to. So in this case, we want to dump this to the file we just opened, which is this F variable. So if I save that and run it, now let me open up my sidebar here. And here in the same directory, we can see that it created this new underscore states.json. So if we open this up, we can see that it's kind of compressed together, but we have states key here, and then within this list we have name Alabama, abbreviation Alabama, and then it moves right on to Alaska. So it did delete those phone numbers there. So that did do what we wanted, but it's not really easy to read. So just like we did with the dump_s method, we can also pass in an indent argument into our dump method here to clean this up a bit. So if I say indent is equal to 2 and save that and run it, if we open back up our new states JSON file here, then we can see that this is now a lot easier to read. Okay, so now that we've seen how to work with JSON strings and files and going back and forth between Python objects, now let's look at a real-world example of using JSON data so that we can get a sense for how this might be used in practice. So it's pretty common for websites to return JSON from their APIs so that it's easy to parse. So let's see what grabbing JSON data from a public API would look like and how we might parse that data. So I found a Yahoo Finance API that converts United States dollars into other currency. So let's see if we can pull down this data, convert the JSON into a Python object, and then parse out some information. So I already have a Python file here to get us started out. So to make the request to the web API, I'm using the built-in URL lib module. And specifically, I'm importing URL open from urllib.request. Now, you can also use the request library to do this if you're more comfortable using that. So you can see that I've already got the URL pasted in here to the URL open function. And then we are setting this source variable here equal to that response, and then we're using the .read method on that response. Now that will just get the response from the website. And right now this is just going to be a string. So if I run this, then it should just print out all the content of that website. You can see it's not very readable. We've got new line characters in here and things like that. So now let's load this response into a Python object using the JSON module. So I will create a variable down here called data, and we'll just say JSON.load_s since that is a string, and we will pass in that source variable there. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that print statement. Okay, and now that this is a Python object, let's immediately dump it back into a string with the indent argument passed in so that we can clean this up a bit and see a little bit more what it looks like. So I will just print out JSON.dump_s, and we want to dump out that Python object that we just created, but we're going to set indent equal to 2. So if we save that and run it, then we can see that we've got some cleaned up JSON here, and I'll scroll up to the top if I can. Okay, great. So we can see we got some JSON data. So we can see that the first key is list, and then within list we have this meta key which has some metadata. So we can see that it says here that the count is 188 items, and also within this list we have resources, and within resources there is another list in here, and inside that list we just have the individual resources that have the conversion information. So we have another resource key, then we can see that it has fields, and then this is where we get down to, you know, the name of the conversion and the price for that conversion. Okay, so let's start working with this data. So first of all, let's just see if that count of 188 is correct. So let's take a look. We have this list, and then we have these resources. So let's see if there are actually 188 resources there. So I could print out, I'm going to comment out our printed JSON for now. So I'm just going to print out the length of that data object, and we are going to access that list. And within that list, we are going to access resources. And just so I don't spell this wrong, I'll copy that and paste it in there. So let me save that and run it. And you can see that we did get 188 resources in that list. So that is correct. Okay, so now let's actually loop through all of those resources. So we can say for item in data, and I should have just copied and pasted that, but that's okay. That is it within list and then access resources. So for the item in that list, then just print out each of those items. Okay, so that's a little hard to see because my text is a little large here, but we can see that each of these items has, let's see, a resource key. And within that resource key, we have these a class name and then the fields. And within those fields, that's where we have the name and the price. So let's say that we wanted to print out all the conversion names and all the prices. So to do this, we can just come up here and remove this line here. I'm just going to say the name is equal to our item. And then to dig down into this item, we're going to access this resource key. And then within there, we're going to access the fields. And then within the fields, we're going to access the name. So now I will save that and paste it in here because now we want to access the price. So I'll say price is equal to all that same information, but now instead of the name in those fields, we want to access the price in those fields. And this might look a little messy here, but you'll end up doing this a lot when working with JSON data. Some of this JSON data, when you're working, with real world examples, you kind of have to dig down a bit until you get exactly what you're looking for. So now we should have the name and the price of those conversions. So if I print out name and price and save that and run it, then now we have the name of each conversion and then the actual price of that conversion. Okay, so now let's actually use these conversion rates to convert US dollars to a specific currency. So I'm going to create a new dictionary that has all of these names as the key and all of the conversion rates as the value so that we can access these quickly. So above our for loop here, I'm just going to create an empty dictionary. So I'm going to call this USD rates and set that to an empty dictionary there. And then within our loop, we can add each of these names as a key by saying USD rates, and we'll use the name as the key, and then the values will be the prices. So we'll set the price there and save that. Oh, and it looks like I actually have a typo here. This is supposed to be USD rates, not USR rates. Okay, so now that we have that new dictionary set up, we can access a specific value just by accessing that key. So we can get the USD to Euro rate just by printing out, just print out USD rates. And then we want to access the key for USD into Euros. So let's save that and run it. And we can see that this says that the USD is equal to about 0.8465 euros. Now, these conversions here, I just have these written down, so it's not like I've memorized these. If you pull down this data for yourself, then you can see whatever conversion you'd like. Okay, so now let's actually make a conversion. So if we wanted to convert, let's say 50 US dollars to euros, then we could say 50 times, and now this is actually a float value here, but it's coming in as a string right now. So let's convert that to a float, and then we can save that and run it. So 50 US dollars would right now be about 42.325 euros. And to change this conversion, you could just pass in a different currency. So let's say that we wanted to convert to Indian rupees, then that would just be USD to INR. So if we save that and run it, then we can see that that conversion is about 50 USD to 3,240. Now, if you wanted to, then you could write a script that pulls down this conversion information from the API once a day, and then save it to a local JSON file for faster access, and then write a function that accesses this information in a more repeatable way. So we can see how understanding how to parse and work with this JSON information can be extremely beneficial for grabbing data from the internet and using it to fit our needs. And there are countless other JSON APIs out there, and it's essential to know how to work with this information if you want to grab data from external sources. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully now you understand how to work with JSON data and convert back and forth between that and Python objects. But if anyone does have any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoyed these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon, and there's a link to that page in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.